December 20th, 1943, 11:32 a.m. The skies above Bremen, Germany. 21-year-old Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown gripped the yoke of his B-17 Flying Fortress, ye old pub, so tightly his knuckles turned white. It was his very first combat mission. 10 men on board. 6,000 pounds of bombs. Target, the Focke-Wulf 190 fighter factory on the edge of the city. But the Germans were waiting. Charlie's bomber had been placed in the deadliest position in the entire formation. The far right edge, the spot the Luftwaffe fighters always hit first. The veterans called it Purple Heart Corner because the men who flew there usually came home in body bags or didn't come home at all. Then happened. Boom. A 20mm cannon shell exploded directly in front of the cockpit. The plexiglass nose shattered into 1,000 pieces. At 27,000 feet, the temperature was minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. A 150 miles per hour hurricane of freezing wind roared through the broken nose. Engine number 2 died instantly. Engine number 4 began screaming, overspeeding toward catastrophic failure. Charlie had to throttle it back or risk the whole plane exploding. The formation pulled away. In seconds, the old pub was alone. The German fighters saw their chance. 12 to 15 Messerschmitt Bf 109s and FW 190s dove like wolves onto a wounded deer. For more than 10 brutal minutes, they tore the B-17 apart. The tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, took a direct 20mm hit. He was killed instantly. Most of the crew was wounded. Charlie himself caught a bullet fragment in his right shoulder. The oxygen system ruptured. Hydraulic lines burst. Electrical systems failed. The freezing cold locked the oil in the defensive machine gun solid. Of the 11 guns on board, only 3 still worked. Then the oxygen ran out completely. At 27,000 feet, without oxygen, the human brain simply shuts down. Charlie's vision tunneled. His hands went numb. Beside him, co-pilot Spencer Luke was already unconscious. Charlie's final thought before darkness swallowed him. We're all going to die on our very first mission. The B-17 dropped into an uncontrolled dive. Airspeed climbed past 300 miles per hour. The wings screamed under the stress. Any second now, they would rip off. But then, something impossible happened. At roughly 1,000 feet above the German countryside, the thicker air revived Charlie just enough. He woke up. With every ounce of strength left in his broken body, he pulled back on the yoke. The bomber leveled out, barely 50 feet above the treetops. Charlie looked around the cockpit. Blood everywhere. Wounded men groaning. His tail gunner was dead. His plane was a flying wreck. And worst of all, he had just flown directly over a German fighter airfield. On that airfield, a 28-year-old Luftwaffe pilot named Franz Stigler was refueling his Messerschmitt Bf 109. That morning, he had already shot down 2 American bombers. One more heavy bomber kill, and he would earn the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. A medal that would honor not just him, but his brother August, who had been killed in 1940. Franz looked up. He saw the limping, bleeding B-17 crawling across the sky at treetop height. An easy target, a guaranteed kill. He sprinted to his fighter. The engine roared to life. Within minutes, he was airborne, closing fast on the crippled American bomber. He slid in behind the tail. His finger rested on the trigger of his twin 13mm machine guns and 20mm cannon. One squeeze. That was all it would take. But what Franz Stigler saw through his gun sight changed everything. The tail compartment was shredded. Through the gaping holes, he could see the body of the young tail gunner, frozen blood hanging in long red icicles. The man was clearly dead. Franz pulled alongside the bomber and looked through more holes in the fuselage. What he saw next stopped his heart. Wounded men trying desperately to help other wounded men. One crewman with blood covering his face. Another whose leg had been torn open by shrapnel. The pilot and co-pilot struggling just to keep the aircraft in the air. No one was fighting back. They couldn't. They were simply trying to survive. In that moment, Franz remembered the words of his commanding officer in North Africa, Gustav Rodel. You are fighter pilots first, last, and always. If I ever hear of any of you shooting a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. A man in a parachute is defenseless. Killing him isn't war. It's murder. These Americans weren't hanging from parachutes, but they might as well have been. No guns, no speed, no defense. Shooting them down would not be a victory. It would be an execution. Franz felt the weight of the rosary beads his mother had given him, the mother who had wanted him to become a priest. He had chosen to fly instead, but he had never abandoned his faith. He made his decision. Franz Stigler would not shoot down this bomber. He would not kill these men. He would not earn his Knight's Cross this way. But now he faced a new problem. The American bomber was flying deeper into Germany, the wrong direction. If Charlie kept going this way, he would fly over more airfields, more flak batteries, more fighters. Someone else would finish the job. The crew would die anyway. Sparing them was not the same as saving them. So Franz Stigler made the most dangerous decision of his life. He would escort the American bomber to safety. In Nazi Germany, that was treason. A German pilot who deliberately allowed an enemy aircraft to escape faced a court-martial and a firing squad. Franz knew the penalty. He did it anyway. He pulled his Messerschmitt right up next to the B-17's left wing, so close the two planes were flying just feet apart. From the ground, their silhouettes would merge into one shape. Any German gunner looking up would see a German fighter escorting what might look like a captured B-17 on a training flight and hold his fire. It was a desperate, suicidal gamble, but it was their only chance. Inside Ye Old Pub, Charlie Brown watched the German fighter slide into position beside him. His heart slammed against his ribs. He ordered his top turret gunner to aim at the German, but not to fire. What the hell was happening? Was this some kind of cruel game? Was the German calling for reinforcements? The B-17 limped westward. The German fighter stayed glued to its wing. Mile after mile, minute after minute, they passed over farms, villages, columns of German trucks. At any second, a flak battery could open up. At any second, another German fighter could appear and ask why Franz Stigler was flying with the enemy instead of destroying it. But no one fired. The coast appeared ahead. The North Sea, 250 miles of freezing water between Germany and England. If the old pub could cross that water, the crew would live. If the engines failed over the open ocean, they would die. Franz Stigler stayed in formation. He flew so close his wingtip nearly brushed the bomber's fuselage. He was daring the coastal anti-aircraft gunners to shoot, because if they fired at the B-17, they would hit him too. The gamble worked. The coastal batteries held their fire. Radar tracked two aircraft flying in tight formation and assumed they were friendly. Ye Old Pub crossed the beach and headed out over the gray, freezing North Sea. Franz Stigler had done the impossible. He had escorted an enemy bomber through the most heavily defended airspace in Europe. He had saved 9 American lives, but he could not follow them to England. His fuel was low. His radiator was still damaged from an American .50 caliber bullet earlier that morning. If he landed in Britain, he would spend the rest of the war as a prisoner. He had to turn back. Franz pulled alongside the cockpit one last time. Charlie Brown stared at him through the shattered window. Their eyes met. 2 young men from opposite sides of a merciless war, separated by only a few feet of frozen air. Franz raised his hand to his forehead and saluted the American pilot. Then he banked his Messerschmitt sharply to the left and disappeared into the gray sky, heading back toward Germany. Charlie Brown watched him go. He still didn't know the German's name. He still didn't understand why he had been spared. All he knew was that a man who should have killed him had chosen to let him live. But Charlie's ordeal was far from over. He was now 250 miles from England in a bomber that was barely flying. 3 engines damaged. 1 unreliable. No oxygen. No heat. No radio. 1 man dead. 6 more wounded. The North Sea in December is one of the coldest, most unforgiving places on Earth. Would they make it home? Somewhere over the North Sea. December 20th, 1943. Afternoon. Charlie Brown was now flying blind into a wall of gray. 250 miles of freezing ocean stretched between him and England. The water below was barely above freezing. If they went down, hypothermia would kill them in minutes. 3 of the 4 engines were crippled. Engine number 1 was the only one running at full power. Engine number 3 was limping along at half strength. Engine number 4 kept surging and fading like it was about to quit. The B-17 was barely holding 140 miles per hour, dangerously slow. Any slower, and it would stall and drop into the sea. The crew was fighting for their lives. Ball turret gunner Sam Blackford had lost feeling in his feet. Frostbite was setting in fast because his heated suit had shorted out. Radio operator Richard Dick Petchout had taken shrapnel in the eye and could barely see, but he kept trying to fix the destroyed radio to send a distress call. No answer ever came. The morphine syringes were frozen solid. Useless. Tail gunner Hugh Eckenrode's body remained where he fell. There was no time to mourn. The living had to stay alive. Charlie's shoulder throbbed from the bullet fragment. His hands ached from gripping the yoke. He did the math in his head. 250 miles at 140 miles per hour equals almost 2 hours. 2 hours in a plane that could fall apart at any moment. 2 hours over water that would kill them in minutes if they crashed. But they kept going, mile after mile. The engines coughed and sputtered. The airframe groaned. Charlie refused to let go. After what felt like forever, a miracle appeared on the horizon. The coast of England. Green fields. Gray cliffs. Home. Ye Old Pub was too damaged to make it back to their home base at RAF Kimbolton. No hydraulics meant the landing gear might not come down. Flaps might not work. Charlie spotted the nearest runway, RAF Seething, home of the 448th Bomb Group, and lined up for a crash landing. The gear came down, barely. The flaps partially extended. Charlie brought the bomber down in a controlled crash. The remaining landing gear tore off. The plane skidded across the tarmac in a shower of sparks and finally stopped. Charlie sat motionless in the cockpit, hands still locked on the controls, body shaking. He had done it. He had brought his crew home. 8 men climbed out alive. 1 was carried out dead. Ye Old Pub would never fly again. At the debriefing, Charlie told the intelligence officers everything. The German fighter that appeared behind them, how the pilot flew alongside instead of attacking, the salute before he turned away. The officers listened in stunned silence. Then they gave him an order. You will never speak of this again. This is classified. They didn't want the American public to hear that a German pilot had shown mercy. It might create sympathy for the enemy. So Charlie kept the secret for 46 years. Meanwhile, back in Germany, Franz Stigler landed his Messerschmitt at his airfield near Bremen. He told no one what he had done. If anyone found out he had escorted an enemy bomber to safety, he would be court-martialed and executed. So Franz kept the secret too. 2 men, opposite sides of the war, each carrying a story they could never tell, each wondering if the other had survived. 46 years later, 1989, Charlie Brown, now retired, was invited to speak at the Gathering of Eagles at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. For the first time in 4 decades, he told the story publicly. After the speech, something changed. He realized he had to know. Who was that German pilot? Why did he spare them? Did he survive the war? Charlie began searching. Air Force archives, German records, letters to historians. Years passed. Every lead went cold. Then, in 1990, he wrote one final letter to a newsletter for former Luftwaffe pilots called Jägerblatt. He described the encounter in detail, the date, the location, the type of aircraft. A few weeks later, a letter arrived with a Canadian postmark. Inside, a single sheet of paper with careful handwriting. 3 words that changed everything. I was the one. Franz Stigler had read the newsletter. He recognized the story instantly. After 46 years of silence, he finally learned the American bomber had made a home. The crew had survived. Charlie read the letter with tears streaming down his face. Every detail matched. There was no doubt. Charlie called directory assistance in Vancouver, British Columbia. The operator found the number for Franz Stigler. Charlie dialed with trembling hands. A voice answered, an old man with a German accent. Charlie identified himself. There was a long pause. Then Franz Stigler began to cry. They talked for hours. They discovered they had lived less than 200 miles apart for years. Franz in Vancouver, Charlie in Seattle, before moving to Miami. They had been neighbors and never known it. They agreed to meet that summer in Florida. Summer 1990. A hotel lobby in Florida. Two old men walked toward each other across the room. Charlie Brown, 67. Franz Stigler, 74. Enemies once, now brothers. They embraced. They wept. A friend recorded it on video. Two men holding each other, shoulders shaking, voices breaking. They didn't let go for a long time. Charlie showed Franz photos, not just of himself, but of his children and grandchildren. All the people who existed, because Franz lifted his finger from the trigger in 1943. Franz stared at the photos, tears in his eyes again. He never received his Knight's Cross. But in that moment, he received something far more valuable than any medal. 3 months later, September 1990, the 379th Bomb Group held a reunion in Massachusetts. They invited Franz as their guest of honor. 2 surviving crew members from Ye Old Pub were there, Sam Blackford and Richard Petchout. Both had lived full lives. Both had families. They embraced Franz with tears and laughter. They thanked him for the decades they had been given. They introduced him to their children and grandchildren. 25 people stood in that room who would never have been born if Franz had pulled the trigger. The reunion made Franz an honorary member of the 379th Bomb Group, a German fighter ace welcomed into an American bomber unit. Former enemies, now brothers. Charlie and Franz traveled together whenever they could. They spoke at air museums, schools, military gatherings. Veterans wept. Young people shook their hands. Their story restored faith in humanity for millions. In 1993, Franz received the Star of Peace from the Combatants Federation of Europe for exceptional humanity in wartime. He always said, "I simply did what any honorable man would do." In 2008, the U.S. Air Force finally declassified the mission and awarded the entire crew the Silver Star, one of the highest awards for valor. Charlie Brown received the Air Force Cross, the second highest award in the Air Force. 65 years after their mission, they finally received the recognition they deserved. Franz Stigler passed away on March 22, 2008, at age 92. Charlie Brown followed 8 months later, on November 24, 2008, at age 87. They died the same year, as if neither could bear to live long without the other. Their story lives on in the book A Higher Call by Adam Makos, in the Sabaton song No Bullets Fly, in a restored B-17 painted in Ye Old Pub's colors that still flies at air shows today. It's not just a war story. It's proof that even in the darkest moments of history, one man's choice to answer a higher call can echo through generations. Because sometimes mercy wins. Thank you for reading this incredible true story. If it moved you the way it moved me, hit that like button. It helps share this story with more Americans who need to hear it. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? United States. And if you know someone who served, share this with them. Stories like this remind us what real heroism looks like. Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler, never forgotten.